Yeah, so let's take a look at the topics for today. Of course, election has come to an end, so we will take a look at the results. I already took a sneak peek, but we'll take a look at it together. I didn't prepare any demos. I don't know if you guys have something to talk about or a demo to show or something else.
For me, it's more talk during this session about maybe a discussion launch on GitHub.
You want to talk about GitHub?
And the some kind of server affinity.
Oh
Execute
yeah,
the
yeah, you
workflow.
mentioned that server affinity. Yeah, let's talk about that.
I don't know if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I do. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so let's talk about the election results, the server affinity, and just a short update on Elsa 3. I did a little bit of refactorings to make the APIs a little bit nicer. Did some small work on the designer side. And good news, there's also a front-end developer who is picking up some of the front-end tasks to work on the designer, so that should be helpful. All right, let's take a look at the results. So here it is. We have Amanda with 76 votes, Christina 60 votes, Frans 49, myself 44, and Jeremy 43. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are first members of the first steering committee of Elsa. So congratulations, everyone. So moving on, let me show some brief updates on Elsa 3 and then we can talk about the server affinity. So lots of the updates for Elsa 3 are a bit of refactoring, and I think mostly to make the configuration API a little bit more extensible, modular, so that it would look something like this. This will probably go away. This will be encapsulated within add Elsa, and then the add Elsa method accepts a lambda that gives you a Elsa options configurator, and this is an object that holds a collection of configurator objects, and that means any packets in the system could be custom packages, existing packages provided by this repository can extend this collection with custom configurators, and this allows a couple of useful features. For example, it allows you to replace the default persistence provider, which by default will be a null implementation of the provider, which you can then replace with an in-memory one if you want, or in this example, an entity framework provider, which itself can then be configured with whatever is specific to that configurator. In this case, the entity framework provider can be configured with the SQLite provider or a SQL Server provider or Postgres, etc. So this way, many default options can be pre-configured, but easily replaced or overridden by the user as they want. So the end goal, of course, is to be able to just say, when you start a new project, to say, just add Elsa, and that's it. Should allow you to just use Elsa in a basic fashion. So it will add some common activities, some necessary services, a runtime, which before this update was proto-actor, and then proto-actor will be using the in-memory cluster. But now it's even simpler. It doesn't even rely on proto-actor. It uses a default implementation of a workflow invoker that can just execute workflows without needing any persistence or a proto-actor runtime or anything else. But you can, with this system, easily configure other implementations for certain services, such as the workflow invoker. So that's the end goal. It's not done yet, but it's getting there. So that's the API part. The designer is now more functional, so it means it allows you to create an actual flowchart workflow that actually executes. So that was something that didn't actually work yet, but that's now been implemented fully. And what I mean by that is that you could, for example, implement an HTTP endpoint workflow connected to an if activity, and then before the change, the flowchart activity didn't completely work, so it would actually invoke the if end of write line activity, but then the next one wouldn't be invoked, and that's because this write line activity is invoked or scheduled by the if activity, because this one actually becomes a property value of the then property of the if activity. But then once this one executed and was finished, the flowchart activity that's represented by this canvas wasn't being signaled with the completion of this activity. So it would not schedule this one, because this write line activity, is not a property of then, for example. It's just a free floating activity with a connection. So the flowchart did register a connection between this write line and this one, but it wouldn't then actually schedule the next activity connected to the finished one. So technical details, but that now works. I did a small change on the UI. So before this change, everything was a solid color. Now it's a little bit, the activities are a little bit larger and the body is white. Does decrease the contrast between the background canvas and the activities themselves, so might need some more work, maybe using a subtle drop shadow or something else. And maybe there's a designer that looks at this and has some good idea to make it more attractive. Yeah, so that's a brief update on what I've been up to last week. Let's take a quick look at the board. So this is the Elsa 3 board. Yeah, stuff has been done here. And this guy is working on an issue where the workflow property panel doesn't update. So that's the issue when you select or click on the canvas. On the right hand side, you now see the workflow property editor, but there's a bug where the settings don't get updated. So if I say sample workflow here and I change the active panel to some activity property editor and then show this panel again, this didn't get saved. Or maybe I pulled a fix, I don't know, because this used to be empty, now it's suddenly working, but it's not very reliable, so that's being worked on. Maybe it got fixed accidentally, I don't know, but didn't work before this demo, now it works. But as I said, it needs to, we need to make sure it works reliably. So it's small issues like that. It's also the drag and drop issue when, for example, when you zoom out and you start adding activities, as you notice, it's not dropping onto the released location. It jumps to some other location. So that's another issue. So we have a bunch of these. Once they are, especially this one, the designer one, once they are implemented, like automatic layout, a toolbar, then it's becoming something close to actually production ready. So making progress there.
I have one comment here. On the activities list on the left-hand side, I can see that you are using the full icon. I think if we have a lot of activities, then the list will become big.
True.
So can instead we have like shorter lines for each one of the activities so that we can quickly navigate between them?
You mean in terms of height, have a less high activity, so maybe half or 70%. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, for sure.
And maybe it's planned to put also a search bar.
Yeah, definitely we need a search bar.
I have also a comment. If we take a look at the, for example, the if, when you talk about the two next activity, could it be interesting to have some sort of container that contains all the activity of the then, and you can collapse, for example, to read more easily all the workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So not for this version, not the initial version, but this flowchart activity will display that's similar to Elsa 2 and Elsa 1. But I as a additional implementation, I want to have a different kind of flowchart, like the flowchart we have in Workflow Foundation. And there you have a flowchart where every node in the diagram is a container, and you can drill into that. So you can collapse that container, or you can actually look at its contents, which could be any activity, which means it could also be a state machine, another flowchart, or a sequence, whatever. And the same goes for the if activity, where you have the two outcomes, then and else, and then you can collapse that. So for that designer, where you can compose your activities hierarchically, that would be great to have, so that you can keep a nice overview of the overall flow.
And, Workflow Foundation is also my reference, and because I already see that there is a lot of similitude with Workflow Foundation on the backend. I think a lot more on the same kind of capability on the designer.
Well, that's exactly what where I draw my inspiration from. So that's well understood. Yeah.
Also, if we can visually distinguish between the branches of the if and the subsequent activity. So after the then and else branches has completed, and then I want to add a subsequent activity outside of the
Yeah, good point, because if you were adding the if activity to a sequence, let's say, then the if activity would execute, and then or else would execute, and after that, then the remainder of the sequence activity would execute. So that's not currently modeled in this editor, but that's what you will want to be able to do is indeed have a done outcome that we have in Elsa 2. In Elsa 2 we have true outcome for if, a false outcome, and a done outcome, and the done outcome would be scheduled once the entire then or the entire else branch executed. That's what you mean, or did you mean something else?
Yeah, it's about that, but visually it becomes sometimes difficult to
Yeah.
trace statements
Yeah.
if we have the three branches. But if we can visually, as you mentioned, have a sub activities for the then and else, and then from the outside border we can continue, for example, the sequence.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the same solution to having a different flowchart activity that resembles the Windows Workflow Foundation flowchart activity. Then you have exactly that.
Yes, exactly.
Just to see if they have a nice example here. Yeah, so here they have a flowchart activity, and here they have an assign a decision. This is specific, I believe, to this activity. It has false. It's not using true. Here it has two outcomes.
Maybe you can look at the sequential workflow. There is a yes here, and you can collapse, and you have the sequence, the do while with the body, etc., etc.
Yeah, so here there's an if, then an else. Yeah, exactly. And then you can collapse. So something along these lines. That would be great to have as a improved or an alternative option to use for the workflow designer. But I wanted to, for the initial release, to keep it on par with Elsa 2 and Elsa 1, just to be able to ship the new engine, which is a complete rewrite with a lot of enhanced capabilities and improvements, and then improve on the designer end of things. And once we have that, then you should truly be able to create large workflows that are maintainable instead of having this big ball of mud that you can easily create with this designer. All right, so speaking of the server affinity, can you describe a little bit what you mean with this? Do you have I think you have a link to an issue on GitHub?
I was mute. It's on discussion. It's flow sequence context execution. Elsa v3. The idea, and everything is explained in the discussion, is to be able to add some context information to explain to the engine where we want to execute the activity. For example, we have a cluster with two virtual machines, and we have a workflow with activity that are spread on the two virtual machines. The VM1 is exposed, for example, on the internet, so we need the HTTP activity to be bind on this server to expose an endpoint and to respond with the answer. And the VM2 has an access to a SQL database, so we need to put the SQL activity on this server, and it should execute on this server. So the idea is to be able to add some context on a group of activity. For example, say, hey, I want you to execute on this environment and you on this environment. Is that clear, or a first explanation?
Yeah, it makes sense. There's another use case that I came across with another customer that is using Elsa 2, and they have not a cloud environment, but a on-premise environment with a cluster of 2 nodes. And in their workflow, what they want to be able to process some files that are then stored locally on that machine, and then the workflow should resume on the same machine because it needs access to those files that are stored only on a given node. So they also need some form of server affinity.
I already done some part of this architecture in my application, and I use the Azure Service Bus to allow communication between my cloud engine and my on-premises engine.
Yeah, I think this would be very useful, and we have to think of a good way to enable this. I imagine it depends on the runtime to be able to interpret this context information, and that's one of the other nice things about the v3 implementation. You can have different kinds of engines that can interpret different contexts from activities to allow you to implement this setup.
Yeah, and what I don't see for the moment is how we can make this configuration as easy as possible for the end user, and graphically creating some kind of topology in architecture to be able to say where we want to execute a group of activity. And I thought about the sequence that you mentioned, the Elsa 3, which is groups of activity. So if we can, for example, say a sequence can execute specifically with some execution context, all the activity inside will inherit of this execution engine.
Do you think you will be able to create a prototype to demonstrate this with Elsa 3 in its current shape, or do you think we need something else to allow for this?
I don't know for now. I don't have take a look in deeper in Elsa 3. But I have to, and I think maybe before the end of the month, I will be able to take a look on this and starting to work on this kind of feature.
That would be really great. And of course, call me if you want to walk me through the code base or discuss this architecture.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Yeah, I like it. Oh, I completely forgot, but Elsa 2.7 was released yesterday with some new set of activities. The execute SQL query, execute SQL command. This one allows you to retrieve data from an arbitrary SQL server. This one to execute a command. HTTP endpoint route parameters support has released. This was demoed a couple of meetings ago, but that's now part of 2.7. Same goes for the compensation story, which introduced a couple of new activities to implement workflow compensation. That's part of 2.7. Swagger integration and cool cron UI created by Mohammed, also part of 2.7. And of course there were some improvements. So there's been this user task activity packets. It's been there since the very beginning of Elsa 2.0, but it was lacking some helpful APIs to query user tasks and to actually invoke user tasks. You would be able to do it, but you would have to use the low-level APIs. And now you can do it more easily because there's been some new services that were added. Yeah, and some more low-level stuff here. And of course, some important bug fixes like the join that was problematic in certain scenarios. Yeah, some small stuff, and of course a lot more commits were made. Full commit history can be found here. But it's a good release. I feel very good about this 2.7. It makes things a little bit more stable, squashes some bugs, and has some cool new additions. For 2.8, the milestone is still empty, so we can fill it up. But I'm also thinking of setting up a board similar to Elsa 3, but called Elsa 2. To try and an order of priority of items as reported by users, and hopefully we'll be able to work on that. My bandwidth currently is a little bit low with regards to Elsa 2 because of the push for Elsa 3, and nonetheless we need to make a nice board with a good overview.
For Elsa 2.8, it could be really interesting to have NPM packaging with the preview package for the dashboard. It could allow us to give you more PR and test in real environment using the packaging.
That makes sense. Yeah, right now, whenever a change is made to the designer code in Stencil and it's pushed to GitHub, a GitHub workflow will be executed or a GitHub action, and that will push the build output directly to NPM at this moment. So actually NPM is currently always showing the latest packets, which is problematic because it's not always compatible with the older release on NuGet, which contains the potentially an outdated backend compared to whatever NPM connects to. So that's a good idea to have.
I'm also looking to have some option for SQL syntax. So that is something I would like to be able to see in 2.8, to have SQL as a syntax similar to what we have now as a JavaScript and Liquid. But for that, some server-side support may be required. That is something that I'm looking forward to maybe able to create, but I will need some help also.
I think you figured out the highlighting, is that correct? The syntax highlighting?
I know how it can be done, but from server side, it has to give some ability to list out the variables.
Yeah, for IntelliSense. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for the syntax highlighting, that's done, right? Yeah, so it's just
that is
IntelliSense.
done. And the other part will be to interpret the parameters as variables while parsing the SQL string from the server side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be very cool to have.
So I'll try to work on it during this month. I don't know. Hopefully I can.
Yeah, sure. Oh, whatever you can do. That's awesome. And of course, we have a whole bunch of existing issues that need to be handled as well. Not here, but many bugs. 2 pages of them. 31. Yeah, so I would also like to include some of the more important ones with 2.8. I think that's prudent to do. Yeah, I will take care of creating this board. I will add these items, add some bugs, and of course, feel free to suggest. And totally forgot to mention, being an steering committee member grants you access rights to the repo, including the board, so you can also create and prioritize issues, assign them to projects, etc. So I need to take care of that.
Another idea about the dashboard and the packaging, we have seen different issue on integrating Angular, so maybe it could be a good idea also to update a little bit the packaging to allow the framework integration more easily with Angular. I know we have something to do on the packaging in Stencil.js side. On my side, I have no issue to integrate the package in different Angular application. I load it directly as a web component, and I succeed to create a specific component, etc., etc. But maybe it could be easy if we create this packaging directly in the export of the package. And I think I will. I can write other blog post on integrating Angular.
Yeah, man, that would be really sweet. Yeah, many have been asking for support, or how do you integrate it with Angular or other frameworks. So if you can write something up for that, and if there's something we need to do to make it easier on the designer packaging, then we should add that. So do you think that would also then make it simple for people who want to integrate it with, let's say, React?
I don't know about React. I have no idea on. I don't really know this technology. I only use Angular, but I think it's the same thing for React and Vue, etc.
Yeah, I think so. All right, I actually need to go unless somebody has an important topic to discuss. If not, let's discuss next week. I will take care of these little things here, and then we can follow up next week.
Okay, it's good for me.
All right, thank you so much, guys.